Coming up, how are we doing? After 2 long years in a pandemic, what does the future hold for Native nations? Our elders and children have suffered. Plus, we're hearing stories of tribal citizens at the Spokane Tribe of Indians in Washington, and a politics update. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amida Wahopa, thank you for joining us. We start in Alaska, where 4 Alaska Natives are running to fill the state's only seat in the U.S. House. The seat was recently vacated following the death of the late Congressman Don Young. The 4 Alaska Native candidates include Cupid citizen Laurel Foster. She is a 2nd lieutenant in the Air National Guard and a senior paralegal with the Alaska Native Justice Center. Emil Noti is a Koyukon Athabascan and Navy veteran. He played a pivotal role in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. Mary Sattler Peltola is a Yupik Eskimo citizen. She served 5 terms in the Alaska House and is the director of a commission to save the salmon. The last Alaska Native candidate is Tara Sweeney, who is a Nupiaq. She is the first Alaska Native to hold the position of Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. The top 4 vote-getters in the primary will go on to the general election on November 8th. Well, a Navajo lawmaker is seeking to legalize gay marriage. Council Delegate Eugene So recently introduced legislation to recognize gay and lesbian marriages on the Navajo Nation. The bill would repeal the Dene Marriage Act, which prohibits marriage by members of the same sex. It would also make gender-neutral sections of the act. In the legislation, So included the significance his nation places on the marriage ceremony, writing, "Traditional Navajo society places a great importance upon the institution of marriage and believes the elaborate ritual of marrying using the traditional method is believed to be blessed by the holy people." Officials say the bill will not be heard until this summer or fall. In Hawaii, a new piece of legislation is aiming to restore the original name of a long-standing community. The legislation is called HCR 27. It requests the U.S. Census Bureau to redesignate the community currently called Captain Cook to its Hawaiian name, Ka'awailoa. The legislation would also remove all references of places named Captain Cook on the entire Big Island of Hawaii. Last week, the state's Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs Committee held a hearing. 2 people gave public testimony. One was a 30-year resident who opposed the bill.
I must say that the proposed name change has really very little to do with Hawaiian culture and a lot to do with cancel culture. And I'm not sure with all that's going on in the world if this is the right thing to do.
Mehana Kihoi is a Native Hawaiian who supports the legislation.
A common argument that I've been seeing is the idea that this is canceling culture, a phrase that's been coined by settlers with no genealogical ties to this land, a phrase that is not only offensive, but grossly inaccurate. What we are doing here is correcting culture and restoring pono and integrity back to the land.
The area was named Captain Cook because the post office in the area was located in the Captain Cook Coffee Company. Before that, Ka'awailoa was a thriving Hawaiian village. The village grew coffee for Hawaiian chiefs, including King Kamehameha I. The legislation has passed the Hawaii State House and will next move to a committee in the state's Senate. In Arizona, a Navajo man is challenging his death sentence made by the Arizona Supreme Court. Clarence Dixon, a 66-year-old man, is currently on the list of people set to be executed at the beginning of May. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1977 after killing a college student at Arizona State University. On Monday, Dixon's legal team filed 2 new motions, saying the Board of Executive Clemency and the governor are violating Arizona law. One motion says his execution appeal will not be heard fairly because the board who decides the case lacks diversity. The other motion says Dixon has long suffered with paranoid schizophrenia and therefore is not competent to be executed. More than 100 inmates are on Arizona's death row, and the last time Arizona used the death penalty was in July 2014. A firefighter for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community continues to fight for his life. Tyler Packer was critically injured when an ambulance he was in collided with a tractor trailer. The accident happened last Friday in Phoenix, Arizona. The firefighters were responding to a 911 call on tribal lands. They had just pulled onto a highway when the accident happened. The other firefighter, Brandon Bessie, was killed. The accident is under investigation. Martin Harvier, the president of the community, is asking for prayers at this time. It is not immediately clear to ICT if the firefighters are natives themselves. Well, those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, our special series At the Crossroads looks at unemployment at the Spokane Nation and a preview of the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. But first, the pandemic has taken its toll on Indigenous peoples. A Pawnee epidemiologist tells us more. How are we doing in the coronavirus pandemic? After 2 years of wearing masks, staying home, and the loss of many relatives due to the pandemic, we're asking Abigail Echo-Hawk. She is the Chief Research Officer of the Seattle Indian Health Board, and she is also the Director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, which is a tribal epidemiology center. Hi, Abigail. Let's just jump right in. How are tribal citizens doing?
Really across the nation, we have been so fortunate that American Indians and Alaska Natives have some of the highest vaccination rates of the population here in the US. We've done an incredible job of getting our people vaccinated, but we still have a large proportion of people who haven't gotten vaccinated. As a result, we're continuing to see COVID being diagnosed in different communities. And we have to acknowledge that, well, it's much less than it used to be. And we have our folks who are vaccinated. So when they get COVID, the COVID doesn't affect them as much as it was prior to vaccinations. But there's still COVID in our communities, and we still need to be taking safety precautions to protect all of our relatives.
I was reading a report this morning that was actually talking about a spike in infections in the Northwest, which is where you're located. Have you seen anything in terms of tribal nations also seeing an uptick in cases?
I've heard anecdotally that folks are seeing an uptick in cases, but right now we don't have the data to understand exactly what's going on. But what we have to again acknowledge is right now we need folks to be fully vaccinated. And what does that mean? That means that if you had Moderna or Pfizer, you've had your first and second shot, you got one of the Johnson & Johnson, and then staying up to date with your vaccinations. So making sure that you get your boosters. Those boosters are really important. And when we see this uptick, what we want to see is that folks don't end up in the hospital, that we don't have relatives that pass away as a result of COVID. And being vaccinated is the way to ensure, to the best of our ability, that that doesn't happen within our communities.
For folks who have gotten vaccinated a couple of times now, I understand that now it's time to get another booster for a specific portion of the population. Tell us about that.
Yeah, boosters are really common in vaccinations. It's what we do with the flu. It's what we do with other vaccinations. And so getting those boosters just again boosts up your immune system, after it kind of the vaccinations, we want to make sure that your immune system stays as strong as possible. So this shouldn't be seen as something that's abnormal. It's very normal for vaccinations to get boosters, and getting those boosters will keep you up to date, and it gives you the best protection possible. So make sure when these boosters come out right now, folks over 50, people who are immunocompromised, and others are eligible for another booster shot. If you are eligible, please go get that. We want you to protect yourself so you can take care of and be a strong part of your community. And that means staying fully vaccinated is one of the best ways to do that. Because again, COVID is not over. It's not over. And so we have to make sure we're taking these continued safety precautions.
I want to switch gears and talk about another topic that, of course, has only gotten, I should say, more heightened since the pandemic started, and that's mental health. Tell us what you're seeing in tribal citizens in that arena.
We saw an increase in mental health distress. For many folks, they didn't have access to the resources or services that may have had before. And many of us lost the ability to go to what made us strong. It may have been our powwows, it may have been our ceremonies, our gatherings. And so for about 2 years, many people didn't have access to those things that really strengthened their mental health. And so as a result of that, many folks began to experience mental health distress. But what we want to tell folks is they're not alone. There are many resources out there. There are hotlines that they can call. Their tribal organizations are making sure that there are resources out there. We need people reaching out for help if they're experiencing mental health distress. And we know that our tribal nations are working to address this. And it's all of us coming together, creating now as safe gatherings as possible to ensure that we can again start in these activities, but we need to do it in a safe way that includes vaccinations.
It's really hard to predict how long these mental health issues are going to follow us after the pandemic ends. I don't know if it'll ever end, but I'm wondering if you can speculate on how long after the pandemic are we going to be feeling these effects mentally?
No, in mental health, there is no prediction on who's going to be affected or for how long. I'm a survivor of violence myself, and I'm often triggered by things around me. I wasn't able to get the resources and services, and I was working long, hard hours. And so I really had to dive back into my counseling, into the resources that I do as an individual, including my spiritual and cultural practices. But I can't say how long this is going to affect me. What we really need to do is make sure people have access to the resources like I just talked about. And so we need to be pushing the federal government to ensure that our tribal nations are getting access to the resources that we need. One of the things we do know about long COVID, if folks haven't heard about long COVID is the effects that COVID may have on you after you had COVID. For some people, that's fatigue. For other folks, it's an increase or looking at how it's impacted their diabetes. These long effects of COVID are going to be in our communities for a very long time, and that will also impact mental health. And we need to make sure we have resources to take care of our tribal citizens.
Abigail, we only have a short time left, but I want to make sure that our viewers are taking away something from this. So if there was one thing that you wanted people to know about the pandemic and where we're at right now, what would you say to them?
What's so important is get vaccinated and stay up to date with your boosters. That is going to help protect you and your relatives. And as a community, a public health community of tribal nations, of tribal citizens, we care about our relatives, and vaccinations is the one way for us to ensure that as this pandemic goes on, that we remain safe, healthy, and whole.
Well, Abigail Echo-Hawk, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Continuing our At the Crossroads special report, we're taking a closer look at the impacts of unemployment at the Spokane Tribe of Indians in Washington. Rawhide Press editor Monica Pione interviewed several Spokane citizens about their experiences. She asked them about how getting a job can sometimes mean they'll lose out on much-needed food and housing assistance. Hi, Monica. Welcome to the ICT Newscast.
Hi, how are you?
Let's just jump right into it. How is getting a job creating a headache for some tribal citizens?
For some, if they get a job and it's an entry job level, the gas rates are so high that even if it's a $15 an hour minimum wage, it's a $5 for a gallon of gas, that eats into your bottom line right away. So the travel is an issue. They lose their benefits for food cards, which then that becomes a burden. Then they also can, their housing, if they go from free to little on rent, that as soon as they get a job, the impact is felt right away as their rent increases. So it makes it difficult to see how to get out of the poverty level when it's systemically produced to just keep you there at that very low end poverty level.
So it kind of sounds like tribal citizens are having to choose between getting a job or losing out on food and housing assistance, which it sounds like they need.
Correct.
I want to take a deeper dive into the unemployment rates at the Spokane Nation. Tell us about what those are and how many people rely on food and housing assistance.
Right now, the unemployment rate is at 30%. And so if it's at 50%, our tribal members that are on TANF, they can stay, if it's 50, they can stay on TANF indefinitely. If not, then they have like a 3-year window to get a job. And there's training and stuff like that available, but it's just hard to get a high paying job on the reservation. Off the reservation, there's lots of jobs available, but high paying jobs, they're just not here. And it's a remote location where the Spokane tribe is located. So the travel's an issue. It's hard to watch our tribal members want to get out of poverty, but can't due to the unemployment rate and the businesses that are here. They just don't have a high paying wage.
I want to talk about some of the sources who you spoke to. One of them was an elder who unfortunately passed away recently, but tell us about her.
Vi Frizzell, she was at the time our oldest living elder. She is an amazing, amazing person. She worked so hard. In her lifetime, she saw so many different applications. She was a doer. She wanted to work. She came from a time where racism was just rampant and basically encouraged. And she overcame so many obstacles and she worked hard all of her life. And even during the interview, she was, if I wasn't in this wheelchair, I would be working. Her plea was to the tribal members, because there is an education department, to use that so that you can go out and get a job and make ends meet and work and come back to the tribe and help the tribe become better. That was her goal.
And what was really amazing, what struck me in your story, was that as old as she was still helping out in her community. She was helping with the elders. And I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yes, she was amazing. That was a hard loss for the community and tribe.
The other citizen that you interviewed was Barbara Samuels. Tell us about her story.
She was one that she had been plagued with addictions, and she lived out on the reservation. She wanted jobs. She couldn't get a job out here. She couldn't get housing out here. There's a long waiting list for the houses that are available. So she moved in with her mother in Spokane, and then her mom got cancer and ended up passing away, unfortunately. And so she got onto a program, which is our vocational rehab program out here. And she met up with Christopher Zeiler, and she just worked so hard to become sober. And then she has her niece, who she refers to as her daughter. She got sober. That was her goal, was to stay sober for her niece. And if she hadn't been homeless, because she was in Spokane, she would not have the apartment that she has now. And I think that speaks to a lot of people, that the want to be off the streets, the want to be sober, but they just sometimes don't have the resources to help get them where they want to be. And she was one of the success stories, to where she worked so hard, and she's still working hard because she doesn't want to go back to that lifestyle. And I'm really proud of her, because she overcame a long time of addiction.
You interviewed another source, Daryl Carden, who recently got out of jail and is trying to get back on his feet.
Yes. Daryl also, he got into some trouble. When he got out of prison, he wanted to be better and not fall into the same cycle that has been plaguing him. Unfortunately, with the housing and its, federal standards that they set, convicted felons are not allowed to be in the housing units. If his mom had not had her house paid off, he would not be allowed to stay there, which would deem him homeless. He wanted to get into rehab right out of jail because he didn't want to go back into the circle of friends that he had that was making him go back towards the lifestyle that he wanted to get out of. So then when he asked for a bed, there's again a long waiting list, and especially when COVID hit, there were so many people in need, and the resources just weren't available, and there is a long list, and he just lost hope. And so he went back to jail, unfortunately, but then came back out, was sober, and is trying really hard to make ends meet. Unfortunately, he can't get a license yet, so traveling's an issue. He can't, it's just really hard for him because even our Moccasin Express, the schedule doesn't correlate with the jobs that he's able to get. So it's just been a real struggle for him, but he's still trying hard.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we could really talk about this more. For our viewers watching, they can read more about this story at our website, IndianCountryToday.com. But Monica, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A $10 billion COVID response package stalled in Congress last week, and Native candidates are raising major funds for their campaigns. Joining us to break this all down is Holly Cook-Macaro. She's a partner at Spirit Rock Consulting and an ICT regular contributor. Hi, Holly. Welcome back.
Hi, Leah. It's good to see you.
Let's start with this COVID bill. What was in it for Indian country?
The story is really more about what wasn't in it. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, Senator Romney and Senator Schumer, on behalf of their respective caucuses, struck a bipartisan agreement to inject some additional COVID relief funds for vaccines and other needs to address the pandemic that the Biden administration has indicated funds will be running out for shortly. As part of that agreement, Senator Romney and his Republican caucus demanded that there be no new funds. And so for that entire $10 billion had to have what we call pay-fors, where they have to pull money from other existing pots of funds. So in looking at the fine print of the deal, there was a significant amount of funds pulled from what is known as the SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative, and also from what we call the Section 605 of ARPA. It's the Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund, which included $500 million for tribes. The SSBCI fund overall was $2.5 billion, which tribes were eligible to apply for and whose deadline is still 2 months away. So it was a surprise to see those funds pulled from the tribal programs. And there were tribal leaders and advocates who immediately activated to try and address and get some of that language changed. Some of those pay-fors moved around. Luckily for Indian country, we dodged a bullet to some degree in that the deal fell apart because of some immigration provisions and that the Biden administration had announced the Friday before the deal went to the floor. Senator Wyden of Oregon specifically noted the tribal fund pull away in his vote against moving the bill forward. So the bill is stalled for now. The Congress is out on a 2-week Easter recess. And I know that tribal leaders and advocates around the country are working very hard to find a solution path forward to a better treatment of tribes within this bill. This bill is not dead, and I expect it will be taken up again when they return.
I want to switch gears. The National Indian Gaming Association will have its annual conference in Las Vegas next week. What do you think are going to be the major questions for members of NIGA to talk about?
Well, this is a big year, both for elections. I think elections are going to be on the agenda. Sports betting across the country is a major issue, and we've got ballot initiatives in California. We've got the deal that is in litigation in Seminole. We have tribes in multiple states around the country that have negotiated agreements with their respective states that have different elements of those agreements, and frankly, there are different views in Indian country about how this should move forward. I expect that will be the main topic of conversation while everyone is in California for the National Indian Gaming Association trade show and convention.
Holly, we only have a short time left, but I'm wondering if you can give us updates on the fundraising efforts of Native candidates running for Congress.
Yes, this is an important first quarter, and we've covered the number of candidates that have been in before. I think we have around 10 or 11 Native American candidates that are in this cycle. A couple of big numbers that we know have come in. Sharice Davids has raised over $800,000. Reporting in the first quarter, which is great. I think she's raised nearly over 3 million. That puts her around 3.6 million for this cycle, with a little over 2 million on hand. That's huge. Mark Wayne Mullen has announced a Senate run. There's no report filed. Ginger Sykes-Torres, really a bright shining star. In Arizona First, raised 125, and in Michigan, Adam Hollier, the member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, is going to, I understand, is going to report around 450,000.
Well, Holly, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Times you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.